Okay, it looks like we're ready to get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Cindy Lewis. I'm excited you picked my session to get kicked off with today. The topic for today, hopefully you read the little profile. If not, that's okay. I'll give you a quick introduction. You can read the title right there, 3 Approaches to Operational Work, PC 213. Hopefully you found the right room. Let me give you a little story of how this presentation all came about. I was actually working with some people at Microsoft. I was on campus and happened to talk to one of the developers. At the time, it was Project Server 2010. And I really tried to express to him that I said, I'm not sure that what you developed is what is actually being used in the real world. I think they're using it a different way. We had a great discussion across several months. And what I found out is that it's a recurring issue how customers want to track operational work. While Microsoft maybe thought there was only one approach, I've actually figured out and helped other people figure out that there's actually 3 approaches. And that's what I'll be showcasing to you today. Another thing I do need to let you know, I have a customer presentation that is going to be part of this session. However, due to travel issues with snow and weather in Michigan, we decided to leave Dwayne in the cloud, so he is remote. So let's just do a quick shout out to Dwayne. Everybody say hi, Dwayne. Dwayne, just reply that you got that.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So that's our guy in the cloud. And he's watching us via remote meeting. Thought we'd get started with some funny quote here. The trouble with having an open mind, of course, is that people will insist on coming along and trying to put things in it. So just in case you did not have a chance to read the overview, let me help you out a little bit. This session is going to be focusing on Project Online or Project Server. So I realize many of you here are either not on Project Server or you have a different version. So even if you're back in 2003, I know there's a few of you still there, this will become valuable. What I'm doing, just a quick agenda overview. I'll be doing a showcase of the customers. I can't necessarily mention them by name, but I'll show you the industries. I'm also going to show you the struggle, the 3 approaches. I actually have 10 demonstrations planned, and a recap and takeaways. If you're following me on Twitter, the takeaways will be posted at the end of my session automatically. So glad you guys are here. By the way, if you are in the wrong session, I won't be totally offended. There's plenty of sessions down the hall. So first of all, let's take a look at some of the industries that I'll be showcasing. I've got about 15 customers that have been struggling with this concept of operational work. I've got financial, you'll see I've got manufacturing, I've got an air quality, I've got office furniture, a hospital, audio, quite a variety, and it seems like they're all struggling with the exact same thing. So that's what I'll be showing you. Now, in terms of the struggle, before I get into some of these points, I want to get some participation from the group. So somebody shout out, what do you think is an operational work item? Any ideas? Sorry? Business as usual. Perfect. Great. Somebody else? Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Yes, definitely. Training, yep. Production support, yep, these are all great. What if, yep. Help desk. You guys are pretty much right on. How each company defines operational work varies, and that will be up to you to define, but keep in mind it's something that's not necessarily delivering projects. It's keeping the lights on, administrative time, checking email, some of you are doing that. Those are things that we're going to talk about. Now, as far as the struggle goes, here's what customers have told me they've been struggling with. For example, they said one of our problems is we don't have a clear definition of what operational work is. And that's actually gone across international boundaries. I have customers that have offices around the world, and they said in the U.S. we define holiday time means the company shut down. In other countries, we define holiday time as individuals are not there. We've got other customers that are struggling with some things that are confidential. I have a customer right now, they actually do development work, and they said they've got an issue in their state, something called family medical leave, That's confidential. They can't showcase that operational work to other people. I've got other customers that say, we have a trouble ticketing system that tracks operational work. We don't want to duplicate that in Project Online. We have other people that say it's the PMO that manages operational work. It's the manager, so we can't throw that in here. These are just some of the struggles that customers have said, we need an approach, and we want you to help us. So in this session today, my goal is not to say this is the only approach. You're going to tailor it. So how many of you like spaghetti? Show of hands. Pretty much everybody. What they've actually done is research on spaghetti sauce. They said nearly everybody falls into one of three categories. You are either a crunchy, you like chunks in your spaghetti sauce, you like smooth spaghetti sauce, or you like spicy. And they have companies that have done research on this that says you fall into one of those three categories. If they stop manufacturing one, they'll upset their whole customer base. So those are three choices for your spaghetti. They're all acceptable. It's just a personal choice. That's what I'm going to showcase you with operational work. It's a personal choice. One is not better over another. It's just your choice. Okay, so let's talk about the three approaches. There's the concept of a feature called resource plan. There's the separate project approach, and there's admin time. Those three main approaches actually have one additional value add called max units, which I'll be showing you. And I like this little slide. Wasn't the turtle inventive on that? All options take you where you want to go, but one approach fits your needs. Okay, so let's get started with the demos. And these have all been pre-configured. Like I said, there's 10 demos. And if the person that's doing lighting who has walked out of the room, if somebody wants to see if the lighting guy's outside, but if you cannot see this, please feel free to move up. The first demonstration, I wanted to make sure that you have a common understanding of the resource availability view, and I'm going to start with creating a new resource plan. So let me get started with playing that one. Thank you. First thing, this is Project Online. By the way, I'm doing hands-free. Isn't this cool? I'm going to hop into the Resource Center view, and I've got some resources set up. I've set up in advance some generic resources. You'll notice I've got these grouped. Once I pick those resources, I have them going out to Resource Availability view so you can actually see what's going on. If you have not seen this view before, there's a nice black line that shows the capacity. You'll see I've got my resources highlighted. I also have in the lower right corner, keep an eye on this, I'll be changing this. I have the window, weekly, that 4-month period. I have proposed resources turned on. Throughout this group that you'll see down below, you'll see availability versus capacity. So do you know, is positive number good or bad? Good. You'll see in a few moments here, I'll be scrolling down showing you some negatives. Negatives means you're overbooked. Has that ever happened? Notice that I have all the projects, that I have these generic resources assigned. Many of the customers say we really want to use generic for operational planning. Some customers use named resources. That will be your choice to kind of decide. But hopefully you get a good gist of this view. What I really like about this view is the upper pane is graphical, the lower pane is more of a deep dive. And you'll see the pluses and minuses of that as we go through. By the way, that column, that utilization from, new in Project Online, I'm so excited. You can now see project assignments versus resource plan. That column now identifies all of that. So what I'm doing next, and you'll see as this comes up, and I'm going to step out of the way so you guys don't have to look over me, is setting up a brand new project. Now, if you haven't done this in Project Online, the choices that are there vary based on your organization. The enterprise project, we will actually use that to set up a new resource plan. People get confused with a project over a resource plan. And I'm going to show you how this works. Now, I did not speed up the processing of Project Online, so this is probably the same performance you'll experience. However, what I did throughout the demos is I started moving my mouse a little bit faster as we get down to the 10th demo, figuring that you guys will get the hang of it throughout those 10 demos. First thing that happens when you do a new project is it spits you over to this page. This is the traditional schedule page. For Project Online, some people refer to it as PWA, Project Web App. It has all the scheduling features, but Resource Plan is in a different spot. And I'm going to show you in a minute there's actually two ways to get to the resource plan. What a resource plan is and why customers like this is it's a way to put in a high-level plan that is time-based, not task-based. So here's a blank plan right now that's loading, and in just a minute we'll be populating it. What people really say is, you know what, when I'm doing operational planning, I don't know what they're going to do necessarily. But I know historically they might be dedicating 3 hours a week or 4 hours a month to operations. That's why people do resource planning. Now, what I'm doing now is closing this out because I want to show you two different ways essentially to get to the resource plan. There's one that's been around for years that people seem to not know, and I wanted to give you that value add. So as this is checking in, by the way, don't you like since 2010 they added that notification on the right? Very nice feature. From the Project Center, if you know which project has the resource plan attached, you simply highlight the row selector, which I'm doing right now, and there's a button at the top for resource plan. So that's a quick way to go in. Notice I save all the steps of checking out the project. Great shortcut there. So those are essentially a different way to get into the resource plan. You don't have to check it out and click the resource plan. So let me go into the second demo. This one, I'm going to actually populate the resource plan. So the resource plan is there. The very first thing you do is build your team. So again, this is up to you to decide. Some customers want the generics in there. Some people want their named resources. But it's very familiar to you no matter what build team you use in different views. So we're going to start adding those resources. Don't forget, by the way, to save and close when this is done, and you'll see that in just a moment. And throughout the demos, I'm using the same set of generic resources, just to simplify it so you see the same names over and over again. That's the first critical step. Get the resources that you want to plan at a high level. Now what I have to do is make some decisions. For example, one thing to notice, these resources have been set up committed. That means I cannot turn them on and off in the Resource Center view. We'll talk about that later on. Also, I have to decide how I want to plan. Do you want to plan at the day level? Do you want to plan at the hour level, the full-time equivalent? That's your decision. I've just decided to pick days for simplicity. You have to decide if you want to plan down to the month, the quarter, really up to you. So when people say planning takes a lot of time, I say, why are you doing it at such a detailed level? Just plan it at a high level, like quarterly or yearly. You can set any date range you want. This date range does not have to match your project schedule date range. In fact, you don't even need a project schedule. That's a big value add with this. So once you've got some of these things set up, really the next step is to go in and fill in some information. And it's very easy to modify this. Just a simple, typing, tabbing through. So you'll notice I'm filling in some items. Has anyone used a resource plan before? Just quick show of hands. Great. So you guys are familiar with this. Awesome. I was actually in line with someone at the airport, and it turns out they were going to the project conference of all places, and they were actually saying that they didn't realize the power of the resource plan. He was from Michigan, where I'm from as well, and he said that his project managers didn't know that in one schedule you could either do a detailed schedule or you could do a high-level resource plan. Once they figured out there were both options, they could calculate and forecast resource needs any method they liked. So I've just about got everything entered in. And you'll see kind of the next step here is to look at calculate from. The person I was talking to at the airport said this was the most important thing that his project managers had to learn. If you want the software to use resource plan in the utilization views, you have to set resource plan. Otherwise, it'll look for the schedule that may not even be there because this was a brand new project. So that's an important point. If you're using this for operational work, make sure that switch is set to resource plan. Any questions so far? Are we good? Making sense? Okay, so what I'm going to be doing here is publishing this one off. And once that finishes, we'll actually kind of show you the impact of this. So what customers have been saying is they didn't realize there was this high-level option to plan work. They were always going into a deep dive in the schedule, and they didn't have the schedule details. But for operational work, you might just know what you did last year. So customers that have a ticketing system, they were saying we were able to forecast it's about 10% of someone's time. They can do that in this system with a resource plan where they don't have to dive in. Yes, go ahead.
So is it possible to put time to those resource plan items? Do you have something in the schedule to go to time sheets?
Okay, that's a good question. Let me just go ahead and pause this demo a moment. Oh, yes. Actually, we have a microphone. How would you like to step up to the microphone so we can get on the recording? Thank you.
So my question is that we use timesheets and whether or not you could actually book time to tasks or assignments made in the resource plan.
Yeah, thank you. The answer to that is no, and it's by design. Because the resource plan, its purpose is high-level planning, they assume you're not ready, and there are no tasks actually in the resource plan. So if you want something to go against a timesheet, you do want to get down to the schedule level. But we're going to show you in a few steps ahead another alternative that you might use instead. So thank you for that question. Let me continue with the demo here. So what I'm doing right now is going into the resource availability view. And I've got those resources selected so you can see. And in just a moment, what will happen is it will be loading the resource plan details. And again, I said in Project Online, it's very obvious what's going on. So notice in the utilization from, do you see the change? It actually shows you resource plan. I love that change in Project Online. And it's very obvious. I labeled specifically, this was a big customer ask. And why another feature that I'll be showing you wasn't valuable for all my customers, they said we need to know why a resource's capacity is not at full 100% of the time. If you do a resource plan, you can actually see that in this lower pane. That was a big value add and selling point for a lot of customers, and that's what I talked to the Microsoft developer about. I said, they need this. And then he said, well, that other feature is not the way to go. This is a good workaround. So we'll compare and contrast this with some other features coming up in just a minute. So do you see how the resource plan, it can affect things? It will affect their capacity, their availability. And the big advantage of that, I don't know if you noticed, is even if I entered it in days, it divided it out across that time period. So it makes the adjustments whether I'm showing days, weeks, hours, so on. Now, this demonstration I might cut a little bit short because it seemed like based on the audience feedback, you guys have a lot of experience with the resource plan. But you can take an existing project and configure a resource plan. Now, why would you want to do this? Some of you have heard of the concept of agile or progressive elaboration. Do you ever have a project that you can only plan like the first 3 months, but you know there's some future need down the road? So what you can do is take a project that already has a schedule in it that's fixed, let's say it's fixed for 6 months, and do a resource plan for the second 6 months. If you follow PMI, that's more of a progressive elaboration approach. So there is an option in the resource plan where you can say, okay, what I'd like to do is set the schedule until this date, then refer to the resource plan. So that's a great way to forecast into the future work. You can do that with project work, operational work. I use it quite a bit with customers, and that's kind of what I'm walking through, is taking a project, going into the resource plan, and configuring that option. So we'll let you watch that for just a moment while it's going through. Are there any questions while this one is playing? Yes, you want to jump up to the mic? Is there a mic back there?
Talk pretty loud. The capacity would be decremented, right, if you have administrative time. So, you know, say a month's 160 hours and they're out 2 days, you know, it'd be less 16 hours, right?
So your question is about, is the capacity changed because of the administrative time? We're talking about the administrative time feature. I'm going to be showing you that in just a minute, so if you could stay tuned. But you are correct. The administrative time feature does affect capacity. So that's another approach. Yes, another question?
So for your generic resources, what happens if you have 3 testers instead of just 1 tester there? How
Okay.
do you specify that you have more than 100%,
So,
you have 300% capacity?
yep, great. Another good question that came in. What if you have more than one resource? I actually have a demo for that. So if you could stay tuned, you're going to see that. So hopefully I guessed good on all your questions. So did everybody see what's happening here? I'm setting things up. You can, and here's a critical piece, in that drop-down list, you can do project plan until, or you can do resource plan, flip off the schedule temporarily for planning for operational work. I have a customer that's doing that right now. They said, you know what, let's turn off the schedule, flip to the resource plan, forecast the future, then once we've got that set, flip back to schedule. That's another scenario. So there's lots of approaches. And certainly if you get questions that I don't hit, I'm happy to stick around a little bit later on. So I think you guys get the hang of this. I'm not going to continue with this demo. I've got plenty of other demos to showcase. But let's talk about this one. So that's essentially approach 1 is the resource plan. The second approach I'll show you, oh, did I miss a question back there?
Like a project, we can start from an import. Is it possible to import a resource plan?
That is a good question. I have not actually tested that. Has anyone else tested that? Why don't you see me afterwards and we can actually do a test and see if that works. The question was, can you import into a resource plan? I've never even tried it. So, cut and paste? Okay, thank you. So the good answer there, cut and paste. Now this next scenario, so we should be on demo number 4 here, I wanted to specifically talk about a proposed resource. And the reason why I wanted to showcase that is because I get a lot of questions, committed versus proposed. And that is a checkbox. If you haven't seen it, that's available in the Resource Center. A committed resource means I want their capacity to automatically reduce because I've committed them. You can set at a high level the resource to be committed, or you can choose at the task level, if you have a schedule, for that resource to be committed or proposed on an assignment. How you do that, and you're seeing me do that right now, is you set up a resource, and it's simply an option. I want the default setting for this resource to always be proposed, so I could show and hide things. So I've got a customer right now, what they're doing is they're setting up all their generic resources as proposed. They add them into the Resource Center, and they're saying, oh, I'd like to flip those on and off to do my evaluation. So that's what I'm doing right here, is I've set up the resource as proposed. And in just a minute, it'll go to another screen, and you'll see the impact of this. So again, what I'm showing you is the shortcut to access the resource plan. I love some of the shortcuts. Simply what you do, highlight the row, click on Resource Plan, and I'll be modifying the team. So notice everybody else is committed. You see that column for booking type? Now I'm going to throw in proposed. So I've got that new resource. I added a junior project manager. And you'll see the difference right away. So do you see the column now shows proposed? So this resource, I have the ability to flip them on and off when I get to the Resource Center. So first thing I have to do is put in some values so you can actually see a difference. And then we'll take you back to the Resource Center and show you the impact. Publish, by the way, important tip. Have you guys learned this one in the hard way? Be sure to publish when you make changes. That does a great synchronization behind the scenes. So now we're going to hop back into the Resource Center. and take a look at that checkbox that really didn't do anything for us before. I do have to add the junior PM because that's not currently on my list. And as I scroll down here, you'll see that that proposed checkbox, it will now make a difference because I have proposed resources. Before, everyone was committed. So as you make changes, you can turn on and off, and your capacity line will adjust. So that's really a great approach. You can plan for future needs with generic resources that you flip on and off right in here. So I've got a lot of customers that say they love this flexibility. It's all a matter of how you set up your resources. So questions about the proposed resource? We're good. Okay. So good question up here. If you don't publish, what happens? I bet someone else in the audience knows this answer. Go ahead. Doesn't show up. Thank you. Yep. Correct. So the answer is about the split screen. Can you make adjustments for resource plan? You cannot, but I do actually have a demo on the project option to show you. So thank you for asking. So let's jump ahead to number 5. This is the different approach. Oh, I missed a question. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Is there a way to work with a mix between committed and proposed?
You can. So the question is, can you mix between committed and proposed? You can. What you do is you set up the resource. You could set the resource up as proposed, but when you get to the schedule, there's an option to make them committed for the project or committed for the task. That's your call. And
That's at the project level, but what about the resource plan level?
once you set the resource to one setting, that's its default. So you can't change committed or proposed back and forth. But what I have done, and I've tested this, you might want to experiment, is you could set up a resource as committed, assign them to a whole bunch of things, then go into the resource option, set them proposed, and anything future, they become proposed. That's a good workaround, and I actually just tested this week. We missed a question back there? Go ahead. And I can't quite hear that, sorry. Baseline? Not that I know of. The question is, can you baseline a resource plan? I don't believe you can. Anyone know? Export it to Excel and save it seems like a workaround. But how about I show you the second option that you could baseline? So my next demo is actually a separate project. So this is another alternative, and you're going to see maybe this one might be the one for you. Using a separate project to plan operational work. So in this case, what I did in advance to save time is I set up a project schedule. I'm opening in Project Professional, and I'm going to show you some options that I set. I've got several customers that are using this. One is in the financial industry. The options that they picked is they set every task to automatic. They also set fixed duration as the task type, and you're going to see why in just a minute, but they specifically wanted a time frame that was locked in. So for this example, I'm actually showcasing 2 different scenarios. The first one I'm showing you at the top is we just want a task for vacation, task for training, for holidays, so on. And I'm also going to showcase another task that is tied to a specific person. So you'll have to decide which of these approaches might be kind of the best one for you. Few things that I do. The one that is for a specific person, obviously they don't need 365 days of vacation, even though they might want that. I've just given them 1 week. For the other people, I've given them 365 days. That is so they can put on their timesheet, they can record vacation anytime they take it. Now I'm adding all the generics, because I'm using generics in my examples. I'm also adding a named resource. So you can see in this one example 2 different ways to apply it. Either use generics or use a named person. And again, this will help us when we get to the resource center. In the lower pane, we can dive in and see why a resource is not available. So you have to determine, do I just need to know that this resource is on operational work, or do I need the ability to be able to dive in and see what they're doing? So I've got a customer that needs to know, are they in training? If they are, I can move them off training and put them onto another task. That's kind of something you have to decide. So as you'll see, what I'm doing here is basically filling out the resource, but making some specific decisions. And this is the lower pane. I'm not sure if this is what you were referring to a moment ago. Because I have 365 days, it will obviously come up with a large number for hours. You can plan either by units or by work how you want to allocate this person to this operational item. And what I have a customer doing right now is they export a report from their ticketing system with the results of that operational work. What did we do last year? And they use this to forecast into the future. So a lot of different ideas here. You'll see I'm adding in different approaches. You can put in percentage, amounts. It'll calculate hours. You can put in hours. It'll calculate percentage. Really, there's many different ways to do this. It's kind of up to you, your best approach. So I think I've got most of that data entered that we can see. Obviously, I need to publish that. We just learned how important that was. And while that's publishing, this is going to give us some great output into the Resource Center. So let me show you that one next. And I've also set up some additional views that I thought might be of value, because I've got customers using this right now as well. I've actually got an engineering firm, and what they're doing is they're taking the project, they're looking at the Resource Center, and they're saying there's a conflict. Because this person is allocated to these projects, they don't have enough capacity. Then they go into Project Pro and do a deep dive, and that's what I'm actually showing you next. So first I'm looking to see if the projects are showing up. You'll see right there's my project for operational work. Remember the difference, the project is specific task items. The resource plan was a high level. So definitely two different approaches. And you can see that there's that vacation for Robin. It put it on that exact week that I specified. But I'm sure the question might be, well, what's Robin doing on that day? So now I'm taking you back to Project Pro, diving into that and saying, let's look at what Robin's doing. Because I have it at the task level, I can see that Robin's set for vacation. You couldn't do that at the resource plan level. By the way, because this is online, this is all their assignments across the enterprise. If you didn't have security rights to see that, you'd still be able to see the project they're on at that time period. Here's another popular view called resource usage that shows the same thing, but it's got detailed in every task and what they're working on. Okay, now let's dive into the third option, which is the administrative time that some of you are familiar with. Now, the other two approaches, let me just kind of recap. Typically, the project manager, the resource manager, or the PMO would set up. This approach, you still need an administrator to set up, but the team member is the one that figures out their need for the future for administrative time. So first of all, what I'm doing is showing you the administrator view, how you set up the admin time category. So this is controlled on the timesheet by the team member. The administrator determines what the categories are. You can pick as many as you need. These are some very popular ones. Then, once that's set up, I, in advance, made myself a delegate for Robin, who has the team member security role, because I wanted to be able to show you for Robin what that person's timesheet looks like. So give me just a minute. I'm going into the Robin's timesheet. And you'll see the administrative categories pop right up. Because the server setting options that always show, they're right there, you can use it to keep track of historical things that have happened or future. So right now, Robin is sick, so I'm putting in some sick time. Usually what I tell people to do, especially the team member, make sure they save every day. When they're ready to send it off for updates to affect capacity, go ahead and send the progress. But that's great for historical. Maybe what I want to do is plan for future. That's nice because it'll affect their capacity down the road. So let's do that. What we're going to do is set up Robin. What's Robin doing this week? What are all of us doing this week? Project conference. So I can set up some time, and that's what I'm doing right now. I've got Robin set up for some things. Now, Robin didn't get approval to take time off of work to attend the conference, so Robin's taking vacation time because it's so valuable, all the information that they're going to learn here, spending a few days at Disney. They're sending in their progress for that. And once this is finalized and updated, I set Robin up so Robin's timesheet is auto-approved. You could have an approval step. I've got another customer. This one is in the air quality business. They require approvals. Otherwise, everybody would just put in vacation for the next 3 weeks, and they'd never get anything done. Now that it's approved, I'm going to switch off the delegation for Robin, go back in where I have a little more power. And you'll see the impact in the Resource Center. Of course, I have to make sure Robin is set up. So here's a shortcut, by the way. You can clear all the check boxes with that quick option I just did. And all I care about is Robin, so let me quick select Robin. And let's look at the availability. So here's a big difference. And this is the one that I think Microsoft initially anticipated everyone would use. But you'll see a big negative to this. First of all, it shows the peaks and the different changes where that resource is not available. That capacity line goes up and down, but it does not necessarily detail it out for you. So what I'm doing is deep diving into a daily view so you can really see that capacity change based on what they've submitted for vacation. But down below, you do not see anything listed down below. What you actually have to do is configure a report to get that out. Now, why is that important? I have customers that say this stuff is confidential. For them, that's a technique that they needed. They didn't want anything down below because they let their PMs see that. So that might be a consideration if you have confidential items. Now, how does max units affect this? That was a question that already came up. Let's dive into that. What I did for this one is I actually have a generic resource that I'm going to modify the max units. So the default when you set up a resource is 100%. You can change that to represent a group or a team. And in just a minute, Dwayne from the cloud will be talking about that as well. I'm diving into the junior PM, and I'm going to edit what the junior PM configuration is. So you'll see as I get through this that the default setting is 100%. I'm going to represent 5 people, so that would be 500%. I have customers using this when they're trying to forecast hiring. What if we had 500%? Would that solve our needs for the future? You can certainly use that. Once that's changed, it immediately impacts the Resource Center. So customers can use max units in addition to those other methods to really get what they're driving at. So again, I'm going into the Resource Center, checking out the availability, and I bet you'll see the graph is instantly changed. So do you see the capacity line just jumped way to the top? And as I scroll down, you'll also see, remember this resource was proposed. I can turn on and off their information. That was kind of a value add there. Also, as you look down, do you see the capacity numbers? Everything jumped. Availability and capacity, because they're no longer a 40-hour resource, they're 500%. Okay, that's pretty much the gist of that demo. Okay, let me stop for just a moment. So the 3 approaches, I did the resource plan, the project. I also did admin time. You can add max units in to help you with this. Before I show you how this affects the portfolio, let me just pause for some questions. There is a mic. You can step up and ask any questions you'd like. Yeah, go ahead. I'm doing that next, so thank you. So the question was, how does all this affect the portfolio? That's my next 2 demos. Yes, go ahead.
The project that you created, do we have to create that for each resource that's on my team? Like if say I have 10 people reporting to me, so 10 project plans, like you did one for Robin.
Okay, good question. So how do you do if you're using the separate project plan? Do you set one project up for each resource? I've got one customer that is doing something called 2014 admin time for Cindy, and they have a specific project for each resource. I have another customer that's doing 2014 vacation time for the company, and they have all the vacation for the entire company in one schedule. So I think that's a personal approach, but you have to decide, do you want it in one schedule or multiple? Oh, yes, go ahead.
So if you're doing the admin time or the setting up of a separate project, your teams can charge time against those in PWA, correct?
Okay, so just to repeat that for the people on the recording here.
Follow on to that too, but yeah, go
Yeah, so the question was, you want to be able to report on your timesheet. You do need either a project or the admin time to be able to get that on the timesheet.
So my follow-on question to that is, if somebody is wanting to charge overtime, can they use either of those options to do that?
So for overtime, I've actually not tested admin time with the overtime feature, but I'm pretty sure you could put in more than 8 hours a day. You could put in the max that the administrator allows, which is probably 24 hours a day, unless you've changed it. Is that, yes, go ahead.
So just to clarify on your, when you have the administrative type and using the timesheet feature with the categories of the time, you had to do a separate report to get that information as opposed to looking at that online.
Yeah, so that's a really good point, and I was trying to drive that home. When you use the admin time feature, you don't see it in the Resource Center. You actually have to run a report out into Excel or some other technique. So that is a limitation of that feature, but if confidentiality is an issue, that might be one you want to choose.
So I would connect to which data, the OData would be the
Yes.
timesheet.
Yep. In fact, there's another session on that. So if you want to talk after, I know they've got a couple sessions geared towards that specifically. So the question was, can you get that data out into Excel? Definitely you can. They've got a couple other sessions on that. So if you want to meet offline, I know we can connect you with the right session. Yes, go ahead.
So one of the challenges we have is you use the resource plan and you build up a bunch of new project proposals effectively using a set of shared resources in a business unit. Then one of the things you want to do is you look at the overall capacity, you look at the forecast demand you've got from all those projects, and you want to level it effectively, manually kind of optimize how that's going to work. So you might have to move people between projects or reduce some of the resource available on a particular project and stretch out the timescale. Has anyone produced any kind of interface that lets you do that across multiple projects at once rather than having to step through each individual resource plan and publish and go back?
So the question is basically resources are over-allocated, and you want to level at the portfolio level essentially. So there's a couple issues and a couple, good and bad with this. What I found out is the resource plan is not going to be your friend. The leveling feature and resource plan, they just don't work together. But if you do a master project or temporarily consolidate them into a master, you could do leveling when you're using a separate project. But here's the problem, and I've got a customer right now, they actually manufacture construction projects. What they did is they let their project managers do leveling at the enterprise level. However, that project manager could only control like 4 resources, so when they leveled their project, because they could not control any other project, it postponed their projects on average 1 year. So honestly, many customers that are on Project Online are not using the built-in leveling feature. They're doing it themselves with a portfolio view that I'm about to show you. So stay tuned. Yes?
Just one last question here. You're showing administrative time and all these types of things.
Yes.
So I'm looking at it from a production support perspective.
Okay.
I set my DBAs, my systems administrators, my software developer, software support
Yep.
up on a monthly fixed duration. They've got 50% allocation to that. And I want to look at their actual time against those tasks and figure out if they're burning more hours than I think they're supposed to. Do you have customers that are following that approach?
Yeah, so do you want to recap? You're right by the microphone. Why don't you jump in so everyone can hear that? That was...
So essentially, I want to use the project to manage my operations production support. So I set up separate tasks for my DBAs, for my systems administrators, for my software support team, for my desktop support team, and I put them in there at a 50% allocation. And, yeah, the mic's off. I'll yell louder, I guess.
Okay.
And so I want to track their 50% because that's my estimate. I'll put their actuals in. I'll be able to see their over allocation against or under allocation against that. Know if I have too many DBAs or not enough DBAs. I'll also be able to see as projects flow into production, what the impact is in production. Do you have other customers that are using it that way?
Yeah, so let me kind of recap. So basically, you have a plan for support, and you have actuals. I have right now a city agency that's doing that. Here's what they did. They set up a resource plan to forecast what they thought the future would be. Then they flipped it to a schedule, let people track actuals on their timesheet. Then they go back and compare. This was our resource plan, this was our actual, and then they do a delta. So that's what they're doing. I can talk to you about that more, too, because I've got a real specific situation. We've got questions in the very back. Sorry, I can barely hear up here. Yes, go ahead.
So my question is on max units. If an admin changes the max units on a resource that is assigned on active schedules, will that dynamically impact those other schedules?
Yeah, so the question is max units. So if they change it from, let's say, 100 to 500, what happens? It affects the capacity line, is basically all that it really triggers. So those resources that might have been over-allocated at 100 are no longer allocated if you bump them to 200 or 300. Yes?
It only impacts when you assign a resource going forward. If you change it from 100% to 200%, that'll be the default if you don't put it in as you hit enter.
That's a good point. Yep, it does affect the future. Okay, let me go into some other demos here, because I know the portfolio ones are quite interesting. So I've got 2 demos left, and then we'll be showcasing a customer. So this one is showing you portfolio, configuring it. If you've never configured a portfolio view, what I've done with this one is I've got 2 projects. I set one up as the resource plan, one is the actual project, so you can actually see this. And really what it does is it looks at all the capacity load on those resources. You do need, if you want to do a cost analysis, you have to have a field that is cost data. I publish that in advance for each of the projects. You have to set up a time frame, and if you wanted to look at resources, you have to have a role. What that means is every person in the company, there has to be a predefined field for their role. Because in the portfolio, you don't look at people's names, you look at their role. And I'm going to showcase that. I also allow it to pull data from the resource plan. So that's the first part that I pre-configured. The next screen, and hopefully this has all been pre-set up, you can have operational projects against strategic business drivers. Like maybe one is improve employee satisfaction. That could be a driver that you're measuring this operational project against. You'll obviously get a priority of those projects. So first I'm showing you just these 2 projects, and I'm going to showcase one in a portfolio with a lot of other stuff. And here's what it did. The first thing it came up with is the cost. For operational projects, they have to be done, so I'm assuming cost is not a factor. However, resources might be a factor. Here's what it shows you by resource role. And in this case, the generic resources were pretty much the same. I can go to another view. Right now it says I have full capacity, but how do I really know that? I dive into the requirements at the resource and take a look. Give that just a second to load. Okay, so notice it's got every single generic resource at the top. If there was a deficit, when I highlighted, you would see that shaded. There isn't right now. But it's showing you for the period that I've selected the need. Now, one of them that you might not have seen before is analyst. Where in the world did analyst come from? I'm actually going to show you that. Remember I said it's by resource role? This is a great value add because executives, they don't care about the name of who's doing what. They care about, we have 4 engineers or 4 subject matter experts. We might need to hire a few more. I've got one where they're using this for nursing staffing, and they don't care what nurse it is. They just care about the skill behind that nurse. So what I did with Robin is I set up a custom enterprise field. All resources have this, and they've all been assigned a predefined role. So you'll see that as this is scrolling down. You see the resource role? The big problem with this, for companies to get to portfolio level, you have to have a predefined list of roles. If you cannot agree upon that in the company, you're going to have a hard time reporting at this portfolio level. And that's what I've seen customers struggle with all the time. In fact, I had one customer deploy this with 5 roles, and then the very next month they had 10 roles. So obviously they weren't in agreement. Now, one last thing I'll show you, and then we'll be turning this over, like I said, to our customer, is the shortage, because I know that's really what you guys are interested in. This is very quick. I've got a portfolio. I've highlighted deficits. Here's a tip. Just because it's red at the 45 doesn't mean you're over-allocated by 45. Basically, it means that month you have a problem, you have to dive into the not selected projects to the specific role to see what's red. So if your max units is 100, that's a problem if you needed 1.3, is what that is. And we had a question. Go ahead.
On the, when you do the resource analysis in portfolio,
Yep.
and you change the number of resources, right, and you calculate,
Yep.
if you can have 2 months when you're short on resources in a 10-month span.
Mm-hmm.
And so my assumption would be it would just fill those 2 months with the 2 resources, but instead it adds the 2 resources for the entire length and gives you that many more additional hours. Has Microsoft considered refining that so that it only addresses the shortages as opposed to the hammer? Or are they just assuming you're going to go in and manually make those adjustments when you actually finalize your portfolio?
Okay, so basically the question is, you know there's a resource shortage, you add 2 resources and it kind of spreads it out through the whole life. Instead of the 2 months. I don't know if you're familiar with some of the options when you add those resources, how they get added on one of the tabs in the resource analysis view, so I probably want to talk to you after about that.
I'm just talking about in the resource analysis itself. Because you're doing the resource analysis, you're saying
Right.
the executive's doing what analysis, and instead of it just adding, a 50 grand to the project, it adds 250 grand to the project.
Yeah, what I typically do with that is I set up the resource and one of the options, and I don't have that up and showing right now. Yeah, why don't we do that? We'll take that offline, we'll discuss it, but there's some options you can set to get that to work. Okay, now let me go back to my slide deck just a moment. So we've done a whole bunch of demos, and we have Dwayne in the cloud. As I mentioned, due to weather, he couldn't be here. So Dwayne, let's turn it over to you. Everybody again, say hi to Dwayne.
Hello, everybody.
So Dwayne, I am going to click through the slides, and if you would like to go ahead and start talking, and let me know if there's anything comes up after that.
Okay. Well, again, thanks for letting me join you remotely. It was -2 degrees here in Grand Rapids, Michigan this morning, so it was cold. I work at Steelcase. Steelcase is the largest office manufacturer in the world. We're 101 years old, and last fiscal year we had $2.75 billion in sales. We have 17 manufacturing facilities in North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific. So we have a little bit of size to us. Next slide, Cindy. So who am I? Well, my name is Dwayne. I'm Senior Project Manager at Steelcase. I work in the IT PMO. I started my life here as a product engineer in new product development. Then I turned to the dark side of the force and moved over into IT for a career change. I've been with Steelcase about 25 years, and I lead some global infrastructure projects. My main project at the moment, or responsibility, is I'm the SAP Release Global Program Manager. So I'm in charge of all SAP releases globally at Steelcase. Okay, so that's enough about Steelcase and me. So to give you a little background here, at Steelcase, we have 94 separate resource groups in IT alone around the world. Each is unique. Each has its own reporting structure to a single functional manager. And the manager can oversee multiple resource groups. So you have some things that all operational work is assigned to each resource group, and we're going to give some detail on that a little bit later here. Also, all people only belong to one resource group. We don't do any double dipping, so you only get counted once. But here's the key point, and Cindy was indicating with this. When we were going through a proof of concept for Steelcase, we're looking at Project Server. We played around with all of the scenarios that Cindy had listed and discussed, and we finally settled on, for proof of concept, that we were going to use this generic resource group, but we were going to set its max units at 0. That was important for us because by setting it to 0, the people resources then, the actual individuals to each group, would drive the total capacity. This also made it more easy to find projects where tasks and resources weren't assigned. All you had to do was look at the resource group. It also allowed the project manager not to worry about identifying any specific people or anything like that. All they had to worry about was groups. So functional managers then would assign their people to a project as we would go through the resource planning. This is our preferred method. Or the project manager, with the manager's approval, of course, could also assign individual people to their tasks. So what about operational work? Well, we have the normal ones: admin, break, fix, support, enhancements, things like that. I don't think there's any surprises there. And this information is updated by a site admin person regularly, and it'd be per the request of a functional manager. So they would do it as needed. Now, what would be interesting, and we'll go to this next slide, is why. Why did you do it this way? We set up a separate project with operational work and its components. One of the biggest driving factors for us, and when Cindy and I were working on this proof of concept, was simply cost. We did not want the project managers to have Microsoft Project Professional. We made that a requirement right up front. So all of the work that Cindy and I did on this proof of concept hinged around how can we make this so that project managers don't have to do anything with Project Professional. Well, we would only have 2 or 3 maybe people then that would have to have Microsoft Project Professional to maintain it. Everybody else would be able to work through the PWA interface. So those regular project managers would just work through that. Doing this high-level approach to resource group planning also, we wanted to be able to start initial planning from a resource group level and not assign specific people or tasks. We wanted to look at that high level of resource groups while we were still capturing the overall resource capacity. And we didn't want to require any tasks early in that planning process. We didn't want to do any of that deep dive things that engineers like myself like to do. So to accomplish this, and as you can see on the slide here, we created a individual project that has separate tasks for each of the operational components. So in this case, we had an FY annual hours reserved, FY14 in this case, that we were testing. And inside that project, we then had each individual task: administration, break fix, support, enhancements. And then to each of those tasks, we assigned the various resource groups and how many hours they were allocated for that particular type of work. So by doing this, all of the operational hours are captured quite easily in one spot for all of the groups, for all of our work components, and we don't have to go looking around for it. So that was it in a nutshell of what we needed to do to get to where we currently were. You're trying to represent the way we actually record our time and how we look at it right now. So on the next slide then, and Cindy had an example of this on several of hers, is this assignment work by resource. So now that we have the capacity laid out, remember, the total number of people to a group drives that top black bar. That is the total capacity for the group. In this case, it was our IT PMO. The bar goes up and down because of each month's duration or availability. But that was your total capacity. So the total capacity, again, is the total number of people at max units 100. Because we set the resource capacity to 0, then any resource groups that are assigned to it, or people are where we assign a resource group to a project, we would then actually begin to see that, because a resource group is something that you can select. The colored columns then represent the hours that are operational. So for that admin, the break fix, vacation time was in there. That represents how many hours are actually used. So simple math says the delta on that is time available for project work. And that is how we begin recording it. So now people can begin assigning resource groups to projects, and as they're assigned to the project, they will show up in the assignment work by resource capacity plan. And really, that was it. It did take us some time to play through it, but in the end, it represents to us at Steelcase what we're used to seeing in the same manner. And actually, this report then is able to be generated by managers at any time. So they can see at any point in time where their group is. Are they over capacity? Are they under capacity? And how things are going. So that was really it for me. Cindy, I'll turn it back over to you if there's any questions or anything.
Yeah, thank you. So let me just kind of recap what Dwayne at Steelcase, what they did. Something unique is they set a resource group max units of 0 because the resource group itself did not have any capacity, but all the individuals in the group did. So they would assign operational work to the resource group. When they went to the resource center, they would display the resource group name and all the people. And it would add up. If there's 4 people that make up that group, it would show the capacity line of the 4 people in the resource group having no capacity. So that's just an approach they did, and we can talk about that later if you have other questions. But thank you, Dwayne. We really appreciate you joining us remotely. What I'm going to do is do a summary of some of the different the options that I've shown you. I'll do a wrap-up, and then I'll be around for questions. So the resource plan option, here's a quick summary slide. Remember, this one is time-focused. That is a big difference from the project plan option. Typically, the project manager sets this up. Remember, one of the benefits is you get in the lower pane of the resource center, you see those details. Versus the project, the separate project that you might do, that's task-focused. One of the things that we had with customers, warning, it could cause a confidentiality issue, but one of the positives is it's in the lower pane. You can flip proposed versus committed resources at the project level and at the task level if you need to. So it's got some extra value adds. In one of my customers, they actually have the HR department in charge of this. And what we also did was the admin time. Keep in mind the team member is the one that enters the information. The server administrator sets that up, but it does not show in the lower pane of the resource center. So that's kind of different. Also, you could have an approval issue with those timesheets. If they're putting in stuff for the future, it's got to go through an approval for some companies. Max units affects the capacity line. 100% is default. You can update it to 500% or so on. So that's a summary of the 3 approaches. Now, what I'll be doing is talking about a wrap-up. So you have some takeaways that I've already uploaded for you in the My PC. You also can get these, as I mentioned, if you're following me on Twitter. I actually made a questionnaire for you to help talk through the questions for operational work. And you can also sign up for a webinar if you're interested. So I'll leave that up for just a moment, but let me go ahead and do a wrap-up. If you want to bring the lights up while I'm doing a wrap-up, that would be great. So there's the story of a guy on a motorcycle going through the Canadian border and getting stopped by the guards. And the guards noticed he has these bags across the back of his motorcycle, and those bags have rocks in them. So he said, what I want to do is I want to search those bags. So the guards go through the bags, search them, and all they find are rocks. So 2 weeks later, the guy on the motorcycle comes back through the border. The guards see those same bags, and they said, we want to search those bags. Again, all they find are rocks. This is getting really interesting. This happens every 2 weeks. And they really wonder what this guy is smuggling. So they finally, after about 20 times, stopped the guy and said, okay, you're not going to be in trouble. What we're going to do is, please tell us what it is you're smuggling. We cannot figure it out. Turns out he's smuggling motorcycles. So what I want you to take away with is there's a lot of things that you've just seen, but the answer for you is probably right there. You just have to look for it. So thank you very much for your time, and you guys enjoy the rest of the event.